Okay, today, Blake, we were talking about William Shakespeare.
Yes, ma'am.
And we were talking about several of his plays.
Yes, ma'am.
And you were going to tell me about Romeo and Juliet next.
Right. It's a story about a young man named Romeo and a young woman named Juliet who are the members of two families who hate each other worse than death. They merely have to cross in the streets and they are at each other's throats. They're called the Montagues, which Romeo lives with, and Juliet's family are the Capulets. And one day their families are at it again, and they battle one day in the streets when they cross paths, and Prince Escalus of Verona, Italy, and his soldiers break them up, and the prince threatens them that if they ever disturb the peace of the streets again, their lives will pay the forfeit. And then, after they've all left, Romeo comes upon the place where the battle had been and asks his friend Benvolio not to tell him about what had happened, because he's already troubled enough, because he tells him that he's in love with a young lady named Rosaline who does not love him, and they find out that she's going to be at the ball of the Capulets thanks to one of Lord Capulet's servants who can't read, and asks Romeo to read it for him, and doesn't know that Romeo's of the Montague household. And then that night, Romeo and his friends Benvolio and Mercutio sneak into the Capulet mansion.
They crashed the party?
I said sneak into. They don't try to ruin anything. They wear disguises.
Go ahead.
And then Romeo makes the mistake of talking when he sees Juliet dancing with a young man there, and then Tybalt overhears this and sends a page for his sword. And then when the boy returns, Lord Capulet warns him to keep his temper and stay away from him. He doesn't want any brawls in this feast. And then Tybalt says, I'll withdraw, but this intrusion will not go unnoticed. And then, after Juliet is through dancing with the young man that she's with, Romeo goes to speak with her, and the two of them give each other a lip lock. And then the next minute...
Surely not just after a few moments of talking.
Yeah, that's what the book had in it. And then when Romeo stands there with her, Juliet's nurse tells her that her mother wants to speak with her.
What's the nurse's name?
They didn't give her a name.
Let's call her Phyllis.
Pardon?
Let's call her Phyllis.
I'm not really interested in giving her a name.
Oh, that doesn't sound Shakespeare. How about
she's not going
Phileas?
to be.
Dad said Phileas.
That's for one of Jules Verne's English books that take place in England.
Called
Around the World in 80 Days.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest, I'm not really interested in giving the old woman a name, especially since she's possibly not going to be in the remake of both Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Midsummer Night's Dream.
Which you have edited.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then when he asks her who her mother is, she is the nurse says, and she is the lady of this house, and Romeo wonders, is she a Capulet? And then when he leaves, Juliet asks her nurse who he was, and she says, he is Romeo, son of Lord Montague, who one of your father's hated enemies. And Juliet goes to her room and swoons over the young man who had kissed her.
Swoons?
Pardon?
What does swoons mean?
I don't really know the meaning much. I just remember Alan McClellan in Sandlot and saying that, and to Squints, you were perving a dish. Your tongue was hanging out of your head, and you was swooning. Oh, Wendy Peppercorn, my darling lover girl. Oh.
That's from Sandlot or Sandlot 2?
The first Sandlot.
Okay.
Which reminds me, that's another thing I'd like for Christmas, to order the Scholastic book version of the one I've written.
Oh, okay.
That's a combination of both Sandlot 1 and 2.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So she was swooning.
Yes, sir. And then Romeo waits that night and then goes back into the garden where he speaks with Juliet, and that they have plans to marry the next day. And then
It's quick.
we'll have to talk with Shakespeare about the rush. Well, if he were still alive. And well, the next day, Juliet's nurse comes upon
Wait a
her.
minute, Clark. Do you think Shakespeare was in heaven?
Okay, that part I don't really know for certain. I don't know who's Christian and who is not.
Okay, go ahead.
The next day, Juliet's nurse comes upon Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio, and then she takes Romeo with her to the church where Friar Lawrence, an old friend.
Friar?
Yes, sir.
I thought a fryer was what you cooked in a frying pan.
A friar is something that a priest is called.
How do you spell it?
Friar. Okay, and well, then later on, Tybalt asks Mercutio and Benvolio where Romeo is. I didn't really expect him to say, "Gentlemen, have either of you seen Romeo? This guy is hot-headed, and I doubt him to actually speak that politely to them." Then, when Romeo comes by and refuses to fight with him, Mercutio thinks him to be a coward and draws his sword. He tries to break up the two of them, but Tybalt reaches under Romeo's arm and stabs Mercutio. Then Romeo and Benvolio rush him to an inn, but he dies. And then Tybalt
They really did rush him to his end, didn't
rush him to a inn, I-N-N, a place where people spend nights. End is spelled E-N-D.
Go ahead, Blake.
Then out in the streets Tybalt comes upon them again, and Romeo draws his sword ready for battle and says, "Mercutio's soul is just above our heads, pining for us, and only one of us must follow." They fight bitterly, and then Romeo kills Tybalt. And then when the prince finds out about this, he says that Romeo is to be banished from Verona because he knows about Tybalt killing Mercutio to begin with. So he says that, and so he's only going to exile Romeo. And then when Juliet finds out about this, then her nurse says, "Shame come to Romeo," and she says, "Blistered be thy tongue for such a thing to say."
Blistered?
Blistered be thy tongue for such a thing to say.
But what does that mean?
We'll have to ask him. We really have to ask Shakespeare if he'd still been alive. I didn't really know much about those days. And then the old woman says, "And would you speak well of him that killed your cousin?" And Juliet says, "Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband?" And then...
They're already married.
Pardon?
They weren't married yet, though, were they?
This is after Friar Lawrence married him.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh, you skipped that part.
I mentioned that part. I remember hearing myself mention that part.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay. Then, that night, Juliet tells her parents that she refuses to marry Count Paris, whom they wanted her to marry, and then Friar Lawrence gives her a sleeping potion that would make her appear to be dead to her parents, though the letter he sends to Romeo doesn't reach him. And then when he comes upon the tomb, Paris draws his sword, and the two of them fight until Romeo kills him. And then he opens the tomb and goes in there, and he believes Juliet is dead, and he pulls out poison that he'd brought with him, and after drinking it, he drops dead on the floor. And then when Juliet awakens and finds him dead, she picks up his dagger and stabs herself with it. The next morning, the watchman, who had noticed this, summons both the prince and the Montagues and the Capulets, along with Friar Lawrence, to the scene. And when Friar Lawrence tells what happened, the prince says to them, "Capulet, Montague, see what scourge has laid upon your upon your upon your houses to kill your violent delights with love, and then all are punished. And Capulet says, Brother Montague, give me thy hand. And
So with that, I might cut it off?
No, sir.
Oh.
As brotherhood.
Oh.
And I don't remember it too clearly, but I think the book said something about the grief of Romeo being exiled had caused Lady Montague to die of a broken heart, to die of grief. And her husband said, grief hath stopped her breath. And then as the Capulets and the Montagues walk away, the prince says, a glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun will not show his head, for never was a tale more of woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo.
That's good.
Now, let me ask a question. Isn't there some book about a dog and a cat that's similar to that?
Yes, sir. There's one called Jasmine and Rex.
Yeah.
It's about a gray dog named Rex and a white cat named Jasmine. It talks about, as everyone knows, that dogs and cats not getting along. And then, though in this one, it's where both Rex, who does possibly the part of Romeo, is in the streets with his friend Rover, who's possibly doing the part of Benvolio. And then when they come through there, they come upon Tiger, the leader of the cat gang, who I think, since he's the leader, possibly does the part of Lord Capulet, but since he's also a hot-headed fool and does the part of Tybalt, and also does the part of Tybalt. And unlike 2 against 2, Tybalt gives or should I say Tiger gives a whistle, and probably 26 cats show up out of from sewers, from windows, over walls. And then the 2 dogs fight as much as they can, but as we can guess, they would have been dead in a fight with all those cats had it not started raining.
Do you know who wrote that book?
I'd have to look it up back there.
Yeah.
And then so unlike in Romeo and Juliet, it's the Lord that breaks up the battle.
What was that? How long ago did you read that book?
It was in Fairforest Elementary School.
So probably about 10 years ago?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How long ago since you read Romeo and Juliet?
I don't really remember how long ago. The first story about it that I read was in the Shakespeare Stories, a book that had all the stories of it, and then we eventually gave that one away. I have no...
The analogy, the Shakespearean analogy, yeah.
Right.
Analog, yeah, that's right.
Right. And I don't remember how long ago that was.
It's been years.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, well...
So how do you remember all those lines from it?
I guess I just have luck. And well, then I said it before and I'll say it again. I hate these phone ringers.